The last thing I remembered from that other terrible life was the sound of Julian Blackwood's sobs. They were not a comfort but a mockery, a dissonant symphony to accompany my dying. The memory was a physical pain, a phantom ache in legs that were, in this moment, whole and unbroken. The scent of disinfectant was gone, replaced by the dusty, sun-warmed air of my small countryside home. The beeping of hospital monitors had faded into the cheerful chirping of sparrows outside my window. I was here. I was alive. And it was the year before everything went so horribly wrong. Alara? Child, are you listening? The matchmaker, Mrs. Croft, beamed at me, her smile a little too wide, a little too practiced. The Blackwood family has come to propose. You are blessed, my dear. Julian is such a promising young intellectual. By the end of the year he could take you to the city. The name hit me like a physical blow. Julian Blackwood. The man whose gentle promises had been a gilded cage, whose betrayal had been my execution. In my mind's eye, I saw him kneeling in that hospital hallway, his voice ragged. Has she woken up yet? Dad, please let me see her just once. Then the sharp crack of a slap. His father's roar. You disgraceful son. For a venomous woman like that, what have you done to your fiancé? And Julian's reply, the one that had frozen my heart solid. This has nothing to do with Seraphine. It was my own choice. I'll marry Alara. Even if her legs are broken, I'll take care of her for the rest of my life. Taking care of a mistress while hiring thugs to kidnap your fiancée and force her. His father's final damning words had painted the full, horrifying picture. I had died not just from my injuries, but from the sheer, soul-crushing weight of his deception. Alara. Mrs. Croft's voice pulled me back. The Blackwoods are waiting. Mr. Blackwood himself asked me to come. He insists on marrying you. The words were a trigger. I threw off the thin cotton blanket, my body moving with a will of its own. I didn't think, I just ran. My bare feet slapped against the cool dirt floor of the main room, and I burst out into the backyard, then towards the village entrance. I had to get away. I had to change my fate. And then I saw him. Walking toward the village with a steady, purposeful gait was a man in a crisply pressed military uniform, a dark green duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His posture was ramrod straight, his face calm and composed, with a quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him. I knew him, though only by reputation. Caelan Thorne, the son of my father's old comrade in arms. A man of few words and unwavering principle. In that moment he wasn't just a man, he was a lifeline. He was the absolute antithesis of Julian Blackwood. Without a second thought, I rushed forward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stopped directly in front of him, my chest heaving. He stopped, his dark eyes registering surprise but no alarm. Caelan Thorne, I gasped, my voice trembling but clear. Will you marry me? His eyebrows rose a fraction. He didn't laugh or dismiss me. He simply studied my face, my desperate eyes, my shaking hands. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Me? He finally asked, his voice a low, steady baritone that seemed to vibrate through the very air. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes. I know how to dance. I can perform and earn money. If you'll marry me, I swear I'll never hold you back. I'll never get in your way. It was a reckless, insane proposal. I was a village girl with nothing to my name, asking a soldier from a respected family to bind his life to mine on a whim. But the alternative was a life, a death I had already lived. He was silent for another long moment, his gaze searching mine. Then the most incredible thing happened. The stern line of his mouth softened, and he chuckled, a soft, warm sound that seemed to belong to the sunlight. All right, he said. I'll marry you. Relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. Alara. There you are. Mrs. Croft's shrill voice cut through the moment. She hurried towards us, her face a mask of exasperated confusion. What are you doing? The Blackwoods are here. Julian is waiting. I turned, my newfound resolve solidifying into steel. I walked back to my house, Caelan Thorne a silent, formidable presence at my side. Inside, the scene was exactly as I remembered from another lifetime. Julian's mother, Eleanor Blackwood, sat primly on our best chair, her expression one of benevolent condescension. And there, standing by the door, was Julian himself. He wore a faded but clean shirt, his face arranged into the gentle, earnest expression I had once adored. Alara, he said, stepping forward, his voice dripping with a familiarity that now made my skin crawl. I came to take you home. That voice. Those words. They were a key to a prison I had just escaped. I stepped fully into the room, allowing Kalen to enter behind me. The sight of his crisp uniform, the sharp glint of his epaulets in the sunlight, made the entire room go still. Elara, where are your manners? Mrs. Croft said sharply. Look how much the Blackwood family values you. I let my gaze sweep over them, finally letting it rest on Julian. I don't agree to this marriage. The silence was absolute. Eleanor Blackwood's face darkened. Elara Vance, what did you just say? I said, I will not marry Julian Blackwood. I took a deep breath, my voice gaining strength. I already love someone else. I walked towards Julian, each step a deliberate act of severance. I stopped just before him, curled my lips into a cold, pitiless smile, and whispered words that were for him alone. You're not worthy. The color drained from his face. Elara, did I do something wrong? Tell me and I'll change. His eyes were wide with genuine confusion, and for a fleeting second, I saw the boy I had grown up with. But the ghost of my broken legs ached in response. No, I said, stepping back, my eyes filled with a disgust I did not have to feign. I've changed. Changed? He muttered as if the word were in a foreign language. Yes. I've fallen for someone else. When I said it, I felt no flush of embarrassment, no tremor of uncertainty. Instead, a sense of rightness settled over me. I looked past him to the man standing silently at the doorway, a rock in the shifting sands of my life. I want to marry him. Julian stared at me in stunned disbelief. Who is he? I walked forward and took Kalen Thorne's wrist. His skin was warm, his pulse steady under my fingers. Kalen Thorne. A soldier. My fiancé. I turned, raising our joined hands high. Our fingers, of their own accord, laced together tightly, a united front against the stunned silence of the room. This is the man I chose for myself, I declared, my voice ringing clear. No one forced me. No one arranged it. The light in Julian's eyes, the confident light of a man who had always gotten what he wanted, shattered into 1,000 pieces. Didn't you once say you hated soldiers? He whispered, his voice breaking. That you feared the hardship being relocated every time they were transferred? I laughed, a soft, free sound. Yes, I admitted. But later I understood. It wasn't that I hated soldiers. I just hadn't met the man I loved. Eleanor Blackwood finally erupted. How dare you treat my son this way? After all he has done for you. I arched an eyebrow, a gesture I never would have dared in my first life. So what does that mean? I don't deserve someone better. I let my gaze sweep over her, then back to Julian. Listen well, Blackwood family. Today I refuse this marriage. I will marry Kalen Thorne. From this day forward, there is nothing between me and the Blackwoods. I had torn up the script of my life. And as I stood there, hand in hand with a stranger who was now my future, I felt the first fragile stirrings of peace. The path ahead was unknown, but it was mine. And it was already infinitely brighter than the one I had left behind. The wind howled that night, rattling the loose latch on my window like a persistent ghost. I had just secured it when a low, familiar voice drifted from the other side of the courtyard gate, a sound pulled straight from the graveyard of my old dreams. Elara? It's me. My blood ran cold. Julian. Of course, he wouldn't let it end with a simple refusal. In his world, things he wanted were simply acquired. I was a possession that had unexpectedly developed a will of its own. Pulling my thin coat tighter around my shoulders, I crept out into the yard. The cold night air bit into my skin. I pulled the gate open to find him standing there, motionless as a statue, as if he had been waiting for an eternity. He wore only a thin shirt, the wind whipping his hair into disarray. In the faint moonlight, I could see his eyes were red-rimmed. Are you really going to marry that soldier? He asked, his voice raw. I stayed silent, my arms crossed over my chest, a feeble barrier against the cold and his presence. He gave a bitter, broken laugh. I haven't eaten or slept for 2 days. All I can think about is you. You said you wouldn't marry me, that you liked someone else. I don't believe it, Elara. You're not that kind of person. He took a step closer, his hand lifting as if to touch my cheek. I flinched back, my body recoiling from the memory of his false tenderness. His hand froze in midair. Are you afraid of me? He asked, his voice dropping to a pained whisper. I didn't mean anything else. I just want to know, is there still a place for me in your heart? A faint, treacherous string inside me trembled. He was good at this, at playing the wounded, devoted lover. In my previous life, during the long years in this village, he had been my sole comfort. He'd brought me food when my pantry was bare, taken me to town to have new clothes made, his kindness a balm on my orphaned loneliness. I had built my entire world on the foundation of his sincerity. And that foundation had been quicksand, swallowing me whole when we returned to the city and he met Seraphine. The betrayal, the conspiracy, my ruined body in that kiln, it all came rushing back, a tidal wave of icy reality that froze any nascent pity. I looked at him, my gaze as cold as the night. Julian Blackwood, leave. I don't want to see you again. Elara. He suddenly lunged forward, his desperation overriding his sense of decorum. But he never reached me. A clean, slender yet unmistakably strong hand shot out and blocked his path. She told you to go. The voice was calm, steady, and held an authority that brooked no argument. Didn't you understand? Kalen Thorne stood beside me. I hadn't even heard him approach. Clad in his gray-green uniform, the night seemed to deepen around his forbidding figure. His presence was a palpable force. Julian's face contorted with a mix of shock and fury. Stay out of this. It's none of your business. She is my fiancée, Kalen responded, his tone leaving no room for debate. He let 5 simple, devastating words fall into the night air. She is not yours anymore. It was a verbal slap. Julian recoiled as if physically struck. I tightened my grip on Kalen's arm, drawing strength from his solidity. Don't mind him, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's just go home. Julian stared at me, his expression one of utter devastation. You protect him like this? We grew up together, Elara. And now you just say your heart has changed. I met his gaze directly, my tone flat and final. Yes. My heart has changed. I took a slow breath, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. If you had cherished me, protected me a few years earlier, maybe I would have still been soft-hearted. But now it's different. My heart already belongs to Kalen Thorne. Brief Julian. Stop disturbing my life. It was as if I had cut the strings holding him up. All the fight drained out of him. He stood there, dazed for a few seconds, then lowered his head and gave a hollow, broken laugh. You've really changed, he whispered, his voice thick with a resentment he couldn't hide. You never spoke to me like this before. His eyes, filled with a bitter accusation, flickered from me to Kalen. He muttered something unintelligible under his breath, then turned and walked away, his thin figure swallowed by the shadows, the cold wind sweeping through the hem of his coat as a final, mournful farewell. Kalen stood beside me in silence for a long while, a quiet sentinel. The only sound was the wind whistling through the bare branches. Are you cold? He asked gently. I started to shake my head, a reflexive denial, but then I noticed my fingers were numb and icy. A moment later, his large, warm hand enveloped mine. It was dry and calloused, a soldier's hand, yet his grip was incredibly gentle. I'm here, he said softly. Those 2 words held more genuine comfort than all of Julian's grand, empty promises. The day of the engagement ceremony dawned, an early spring morning where the wind still held a sharp bite. Yet the entrance to the village was a riot of color and sound. Firecrackers popped and crackled, sending puffs of red paper into the air. Dazzlingly bright red fabric was hung all around the gate, a traditional symbol of celebration. Mrs. Croft was there, her smile so wide it seemed to split her face. The Vance family's daughter, she chirped. Your fortune just keeps getting better and better. Kalen stood straight and tall in his formal military uniform beside me, looking more handsome and dignified than I had ever seen him. The new outfit, made of fine fabric and sent by his mother, fit his broad shoulders and lean frame perfectly. He was the picture of stability and honor. The villagers gathered, their whispers stirring the air like a swarm of bees. Wasn't she already engaged to the Blackwood boy? Just look at the new groom. He's far superior. I heard he's an officer's son. She's landed in clover. I heard every word, but my expression remained placid. My newfound peace was a fortress they could not breach. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a familiar, haggard figure. Julian was there, standing at the very back of the crowd in a worn overcoat, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes were fixed on our joined hands, his gaze so intense it felt like he was trying to burn a hole through our linked fingers, to sever the connection through sheer force of will. The engagement banquet was held at the community grounds at the head of the village. It seemed everyone, young and old, had come to drink and celebrate this unexpected union. Kalen, ever the gentleman, raised his glass to the village chief. "Don't worry, sir," he said, his voice carrying easily over the chatter. "I'll take care of Alara for a lifetime." The conviction in his tone was undeniable. As I turned to accept a well-wisher's congratulations, my eyes met Julian's once more. He was standing in the mouth of a narrow alley, apart from the festivities, his eyes hollow and lost. A faint, cold smile touched my lips. I then turned back, deliberately linking my arm with Kalen's. "Let's go," I said softly. "We need to prepare to head into the city." The day we set out, a light, misty drizzle fell, veiling the countryside in a soft gray haze. Kalen held a large black umbrella over me, his other hand guiding me firmly as he helped me onto the waiting military truck. Noticing my slight shiver, he immediately shrugged off his old cotton coat and wrapped it around my shoulders. It was heavy and carried the faint, clean sense of soap and him. "It's cold," he said simply. "Don't let yourself freeze." Throughout the bumpy journey he didn't talk much. He was a man of quiet action. He handed me dry rations and a canteen of hot water, and whenever the truck jolted, his hand would shoot out to steady me. Occasionally I would catch him turning his head, his dark eyes checking to see if I had fallen asleep against the window. Resting my head against the cool glass, I watched my village, the only home I had ever known, fade into the misty distance. I felt no regret, no nostalgia. In my past life I had followed Julian Blackwood, forfeiting even my chance to audition for the prestigious cultural troupe, my one dream of escape. And in the end, I had died silently in that small, sterile hospital. This departure was not an ending. It was a liberation. When the train finally pulled into the city station, the rain had stopped and weak sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the bustling platform. Through the crowd I spotted a middle-aged couple waiting. The woman wore a smart, dark green coat, her posture elegant. The man beside her wore a military cap, his face stern and lined with experience. "Mom." "Dad," Kalen called, leading me towards them. I bowed politely, my heart fluttering with a nervousness I hadn't felt before. "Hello, sir." "Hello, ma'am." His father's stern eyes studied me, and for a moment they seemed to grow misty. "Just like her," he murmured almost to himself. Then his voice softened. "Good child, you've suffered so much already." Abruptly he turned and kicked Kalen squarely, though not too hard, in the shin. "Brat. You were supposed to bring home a wife, not trick her into coming. Have you bullied her?" Kalen's normally stoic face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. "No, I haven't." I watched the father and son bicker, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. This was a family. Real, loud, and full of unspoken affection. While they argued, Kalen's mother stepped forward. She took my hands in hers, her touch gentle. Her smile was kind and reached her eyes. "Come, daughter," she said. "The house is ready for you." She led me back to the military logistics compound, a world of neat, orderly buildings and clean, tree-lined paths. The Hart family home was spacious and warm. She had set aside the east room just for me, and on the bed was a thick old cotton quilt, clearly well-loved but spotlessly clean. For dinner she had made a large pot of sauerkraut vermicelli soup, with steaming hot, fluffy buns on the side. It was simple, hearty food, and it was exactly to my taste. As I ate hungrily, savoring the warmth, she suddenly asked, "Alara, when do you and Kalen plan to marry?" I froze, my chopsticks hovering midway to my mouth. I nearly dropped them. Kalen, sitting beside me, immediately tightened his grip on my hand under the table. "Mom, don't scare her," he chided. His mother chuckled, a warm, musical sound. "I'm not rushing you. I just value Alara, that's all." She turned her kind eyes to me. "Don't worry, child. If you truly become part of this family, I'll never let you suffer a single grievance." Her gaze was unwavering, brimming with genuine affection. "Not only my son, no one else will ever be allowed to bully you either." The conviction in her voice was staggering. This was the protection I had never had. Later Kalen walked me to my room. In the hallway, away from his parents, he turned to me, his back slightly to them as he whispered, "I don't mean anything else. If you don't want to marry so soon, I'll wait for you." My heart ached suddenly, a sweet, painful constriction. This man, who I had dragged into my life out of sheer desperation, was offering me patience, understanding, and a choice. I bowed my head, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll follow your arrangements, Kaylin," I said. "Wherever you lead, I'll follow." That night, wrapped in the unfamiliar softness of the quilt, I listened to the wind whispering outside the window, unable to fall asleep. My mind was a whirlwind of the day's events. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Alara, are you still awake?" It was Kaylin's voice. I responded, sitting up. He opened the door just enough to pass a cup of warm milk through. "I thought you might not sleep well in a new place," he said, his voice low. "So I brought you something." When I took the cup, my fingertips brushed against his. A strange, unnameable feeling rose inside me, a mix of gratitude, safety, and the first fragile shoots of something more. He looked at me, his expression serious in the dim light. "Alara, I don't even know why you chose me," he admitted. "But don't feel you have to accept me too quickly. I expect nothing from you. Just know that I can protect you." His honesty deserved my own. My voice was husky with emotion. "Why did you agree to marry me?" He smiled then, a true open smile that made his even white teeth gleam against his lips. "Actually, I've known about you for a long time," he confessed. "I once saw you dance at the Harvest Festival 2 years ago. You were beautiful." I was startled, lifting my gaze to meet his. His eyes were calm, yet beneath their steady surface burned a heat I couldn't dismiss, a quiet admiration that had been there long before my desperate proposal. In that moment, no more words were needed. The path had been chosen, the die cast. And as I looked into the eyes of this good man, I felt, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that no matter how stormy the road ahead might be, starting over with him was worth it. It was worth everything. Life in the city was a symphony of new rhythms. The orderly compound, the scent of starch and polish from Kaylin's uniforms, the low hum of serious conversation between him and his father. It was a world away from the dusty, quiet loneliness of my village. I was grateful, but a restless energy thrummed beneath my skin. The cultural troupe, the dream I had forfeited for Julian in my past life, was a constant nagging thought. One dawn I rose early to wash my face. The hallway was quiet, bathed in the pale, pre-dawn light. Just as I stepped out with my basin, I saw Kaylin emerging from the room next door. His hair was damp from a quick wash, his uniform shirt still unbuttoned at the collar. "Kaylin, have you eaten?" I began. But before I could finish, he ducked his head, a strange tension in his shoulders, and quickly stepped into his father's study, closing the door behind him with a soft but firm click. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, pricked at me. I set down my basin and moved closer, my bare feet silent on the cool floor. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the house was still and their voices carried. "Dad, I have something to say." Kaylin's voice was firm, the one he used when his mind was made up. I heard the rustle of a newspaper being set down. "Speak." Commander Thorne's voice was a low rumble, his brows, I imagined, slightly furrowed. "Alara has great artistic talent," Kaylin stated without preamble. "I want her to join the cultural troupe to study performance." My breath hitched. I pressed a hand to my mouth, my heart leaping into my throat. "You know the troupe is the Army's key cultural propaganda unit," Kaylin continued, his words measured but passionate. "If she gets in, she'll gain both skills and a secure future. She deserves that. She's earned it." His father was silent for a long moment. The silence was heavy, judgmental. "It's not easy, son," he finally said, a sigh in his voice. "Quotas are tight and the selections are strict. What do you plan to do?" "I intend to ask acquaintances for help with the procedures," Kaylin answered, his voice unwavering. "To at least give her a chance. Dad, Alara has talent and she works hard. I've seen it. I believe she can succeed." Another pause. Then a flicker of something, approval, in the commander's tone, though his voice stayed stern. "You're a soldier, son. Don't let others think you're relying on connections. Since you've chosen her, we'll give it everything. Go to Deputy Chief Vance of the troop. Explain the situation clearly." "Thank you, Dad." Kaylin's voice was thick with relief and determination. "I'll make it happen." I slipped away from the door, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. He was fighting for me. Not with grand gestures but with quiet, determined action. He had seen a dream I thought was dead and was trying to breathe life back into it. The day I went to submit my application to the cultural troupe, the sun hadn't yet risen. A pale lavender light tinged the eastern sky. Yet outside the troupe's imposing gates, a long line of hopefuls already snaked down the street. They were all city girls, their clothes newer, their hair styled in ways I'd only seen in magazines. I wore the new simple but well-made outfit Kaylin's mother had prepared for me, my own hair cropped short and neat in a practical style. Standing there in the chilly morning air, I felt like a tender green sprout trying to break through concrete. But my back was straight. My resolve was a rod of iron. Well, if it isn't Alara Vance. A sharp, familiar voice, laced with saccharine malice, rang out behind me. My spine stiffened even further. I didn't need to turn to know it was Seraphine. The name from my past life, the woman who had been Julian's moonlight. I turned slowly. She was there, swathed in a pale pink velvet jacket, a delicate wool scarf artfully arranged around her neck. Her features were fine, her eyes sharp and calculating. She looked every inch the privileged city girl. As she walked closer, her gaze swept over me from my practical shoes to my short hair, a sneer playing on her perfectly painted lips. I thought you'd spend your whole life hiding in that little village. I didn't expect you'd also try to get into the cultural troupe. She leaned in deliberately, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. Weren't you once determined to marry Julian Blackwood? And now I hear you've latched on to an officer's son. You're better at climbing up than I thought. I looked straight at her, my face a calm mask. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He pressed harder, laughing a mean, tinkling laugh. Do you think just because you can dance a little you'll get into the troupe? Don't dream. Not everyone can squeeze in here. When the audition comes, don't come running home crying. It'd be too humiliating. I allowed a faint, cold smile to touch my lips. Seraphine, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I remember a few years ago you were still sitting in the village sun, spreading grain with cracked hands. Now you're all dressed up and talking big. Must be thanks to someone else, isn't it? Her face shifted instantly, the mask of composure cracking to reveal raw fury. She was about to snap back when the registration clerk called out, "Next. Alara Vance." I stepped forward without a backward glance, leaving her standing there, trembling with rage, her teeth clenched so tightly I thought they might shatter. The preliminary round was held in the old regimental auditorium. The air was thick with tension and the smell of old wood and floor polish. The audience was a sea of serious faces. Officials, military leaders, all holding the fate of us hopefuls in their clipboards and critical gazes. I wore a sky blue practice outfit that Kaylin's mother had carefully sewn for me, my hair neatly tied back with a simple cloth ribbon. Backstage I waited for my name, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Seraphine stood ahead of me in the lineup, draped in a thin, fashionable gauze wrap. She cast a condescending glance over my simple outfit. "You chose Song of the Mountain River?" she sniffed. "That's so outdated. No one wants to hear those old folk songs anymore." I didn't respond, only tightened the belt of my outfit. She leaned closer, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Julian is down there today. He came to watch me. I'm sure I'll win. When you go off key, don't blame me for laughing at you." My eyes flickered slightly, but I only smiled a cool, remote smile. "Thanks for the reminder," I said softly. "But I've only ever sung for those who truly understand." When it was her turn, the stage lights blazed down. She performed a piece called Plum Blossom in the Snow, her movements flowing, soft, and deliberately delicate. She was technically proficient, her gestures graceful, but there was a calculated emptiness to it all, a performance designed to please rather than to move. As she finished with a deep, dramatic bow, the applause was polite. She stepped down, brimming with a confidence that grated on my nerves, her eyes full of naked challenge as they met mine. Then the announcer's voice rang out. "Alara Vance. Performing Song of the Mountain River." I walked onto the stage and stood before the microphone. The whispering in the hall, the rustle of programs, gradually died down. I closed my eyes for a second, not to find the notes, but to find the girl I had been. The one who sang to the hills, who danced for the sheer joy of movement, whose soul was not yet stained by betrayal. The music began, a simple, familiar melody. I opened with the first note. It was pure and soaring, clear as spring water, echoing through the hushed auditorium. It was steady as a morning drum, waking a dream. As the melody carried on, I spread my arms and began to dance. I wasn't just performing steps, I was telling a story. I was leading the audience into the misty mountains of my home, showing them a girl with a flower basket, her heart full of a simple, untamed love for her land. My body became the river, my arms the wind, my feet the steady earth. I saw several of the elder officials nod in quiet approval. In the front row, Commander Thorne quietly set aside his pipe, his stern gaze fixed on me. And Kalen didn't blink. He watched me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch, his entire being focused on my every move. When I finished, my final pose held as the last note faded, the hall went utterly silent for a heartbeat. Then it erupted. The applause wasn't just polite, it was thunderous, genuine. Someone whispered, loudly enough to be heard, "Which unit brought her here?" Another replied, "She's not from a unit." I heard she might be related to Commander Thorne. And then I saw him. Julian. He sat in the middle of the crowd, his gaze locked on me. But it wasn't the proud, possessive look he'd once given me, or the lustful gaze he'd turned on Seraphine. It was filled with a complicated, dazed shock, as if he was seeing me for the very first time. Seraphine, however, had gone pale. Her fingers were clutching her delicate handkerchief so tightly it trembled, her face a mask of stunned humiliation, as if she'd just been slapped by the heavens themselves. A few days later, the training list was posted. My name was there, clear and undeniable. I was in. And to no one's surprise, Seraphine's name was there too, a little further down the list. The rumors spread like wildfire. Julian Blackwood had pulled strings, called in favors from the Railway Bureau to get her in. I didn't react. Let her have her petty victory. In my past life, the sooner she entered this world, the sooner she had orchestrated my downfall. This time I was ready. Her entrance onto my stage was not a threat, it was an opportunity. The game was now set and I knew all the moves. Life in the cultural troupe was a grueling, exhilarating whirlwind. Days were a cycle of relentless practice. Vocal exercises that strained my throat, dance routines that left my muscles screaming, and theory classes that filled my mind with new concepts. I loved every exhausting minute of it. It was the life I was meant to live. Kalen was my anchor. He never intruded, but his presence was a constant, steady warmth. He'd meet me after practice sometimes, walking me back to the compound in the deepening twilight, his silence a comfortable companion. His mother, Lena, had become a fierce advocate, often showing up with little snacks or just to watch a rehearsal, her proud smile a shield against any potential sidelong glances. Seraphine, true to form, worked her charms on everyone else. She was all simpering smiles and flattery for the instructors, and she quickly gathered a coterie of followers, girls who were drawn to her city-bred confidence and fashionable clothes. She ignored me for the most part, but I could feel her eyes on me, cold and assessing during group exercises. The calm shattered one afternoon. I had just finished a particularly demanding solo rehearsal and was wiping the sweat from my brow when the deputy head of the troupe, a stern-faced man named Deputy Chief Vance, appeared at the door of the practice hall. His expression was grim. Alara Vance. My office. Now. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The other girls stopped their chatter, their eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of schadenfreude. I followed him, my practice shoes silent on the polished floor. His office was Spartan, dominated by a large wooden desk. On it, laid out as if it were a piece of evidence in a trial, was a single sheet of paper. I didn't need to read it to know what it was. The format was burned into my memory from my past life. "Explain this," Deputy Chief Vance said, his voice clipped as he gestured to the paper. I stepped closer. The words, typed in stark black ink, seemed to scream up at me. Accusation. Alara Vance lives an indecent life, associating with an officer's son under dubious pretenses and disrupting the discipline and purity of the troupe with her questionable character. A cold fury, clean and sharp, washed over me. It was so petty, so transparent. Seraphine didn't dare strike openly, so she resorted to the coward's weapon. Anonymous slander, trying to drag me through the mud of rumor and suspicion. I was about to speak, to defend myself with the cold facts of my engagement, when the office door burst open. Kalen stood there, still in his uniform from his regimental duties, his brows furrowed into a deep, angry line. He hadn't even bothered to take off his cap. His gaze swept the room, landing on the paper on the desk, then on my pale but composed face. "Who wrote this?" he demanded, his voice like the crack of a whip. The deputy chief stiffened, clearly unnerved by the sudden appearance of a staff officer. "Officer Thorne. In any case, this kind of accusation can't be entirely baseless. We're investigating." Kalen didn't even glance at the paper again. He took a step forward, his presence seeming to fill the small room. His voice was sharp, precise, and carried the full weight of his military bearing. "My fiancée was personally registered by my mother. Her name is clearly written in the military family record. Our engagement is a matter of public knowledge and formal approval." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If anyone dares to smear her name again, I will treat it as defaming a soldier's family and deal with it accordingly." His words slammed down like a gavel, a final, unappealable verdict. The deputy chief broke into a visible sweat. "A misunderstanding," he stammered, quickly snatching the paper from the desk and folding it. "Just a terrible misunderstanding. We'll issue a correction immediately. My apologies, Officer Thorne. My apologies, Miss Vance." That very day, a notice was posted on the troop's main bulletin board. It declared the accusations malicious fabrications, the investigation unfounded, and publicly restored my innocence for all to see. Later, as I was leaving the building, I saw a flicker of movement in a shadowy corner of the corridor. Seraphine stepped out, blocking my path, her face a mask of frustrated fury. "You're really lucky," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "So many people shielding you. It seems as long as someone outranks the rest, they can crush everyone beneath them." Before I could reply, a familiar presence materialized behind me. He didn't touch me, but he stood close, his gaze icy enough to freeze the very air. "Elara is my fiancée," he stated, his voice flat and final. "Protecting her is my duty. It is not a matter of rank. It is a matter of fact." Seraphine bit down on her lower lip, the words dying in her throat. The hatred in her eyes as she glared at me was a living thing, but she was too afraid of Kalen to speak further. I met her furious gaze, my own cool and unflinching. I let a slow, deliberate smile curve my lips. "Seraphine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This debt is only just beginning. The incident should have ended there, a failed skirmish." But Seraphine, emboldened by desperation and Julian's fading influence, was not one to concede. The night before the troop's first major gala performance, she struck again. This time it wasn't an anonymous note slipped under a door. It was louder, more public. Somehow, flyers had been posted around the troop's campus and nearby government buildings. The accusations were harsher, more dangerous in the current political climate. Elara Vance. Family background unclear. On the surface, she sings revolutionary songs, but behind closed doors she spreads capitalist ideology. She used underhanded means to force her way into the troop, tainting its political purity. The words, capitalist ideology, were a red flag, a deliberate attempt to invoke the most serious of charges. The next morning, as I approached the troop's office building to prepare for the gala, I found my path blocked. A group of Red Guards, their faces set in lines of cold righteousness, their red armbands stark against their plain jackets, stood in a semicircle. "Elara Vance," their leader announced, his voice ringing with officious authority. "Your political background requires investigation. You will come with us." Before I could even form a response, two young men seized my arms, their grips bruisingly tight. A genuine chill, colder than any winter wind, swept through me. This was more serious than a troop disciplinary matter. This was the machinery of political persecution, and once caught in its gears, it was nearly impossible to escape. The deputy head of the troop rushed out, his face ashen. "On what grounds are you arresting her?" he demanded. "Where's the investigative conclusion? Do you have an official document?" The leader of the Red Guards sneered. "Seems you've forgotten your place, comrade. If you interfere again, we'll report you as well." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of fear. This was exactly the kind of situation that had consumed so many in my past life, a vague accusation snowballing into a life-destroying verdict. Then from the far end of the hallway came a sharp, deliberate sound that cut through the tension. The confident clack, clack, clack of high heels on the polished floor. Silence fell. All eyes turned. Walking towards us, her posture erect and commanding, was Lena Thorne. She wore a moss-green tailored coat and a military-style cap, and she moved with an authority that dwarfed that of the young Red Guards. She stopped directly in front of me, placing herself between me and my captors. "I am Lena Thorne," she announced, her voice not loud, but filled with an iron will that carried to every corner of the hallway. "Former head of this cultural troupe. I can personally vouch for my daughter-in-law, Elara Vance. I know her background, her character, and her political loyalty better than anyone." She fixed the Red Guards with a steely gaze that could have chipped stone. "If you want to take her, you'll have to step over me first." The air stretched taut as a bowstring. The Red Guards exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly wavering in the face of such unwavering defiance from a figure of her stature. And then another savior. Kalen came striding down the corridor, his face a thundercloud. He didn't run, but his speed was formidable. He pulled me gently but firmly from the guard's grasp, placing himself squarely in front of me. "I am Kalen Thorne, staff officer of the 42nd Regiment," he declared, his voice deep and leaving no room for argument. "Elara's own father was a soldier, a comrade of my father's. She is my rightful fiancée. I stake my military honor and my family's name to guarantee her." His eyes swept over the Red Guards and his voice dropped to a dangerous, quiet tone. "If anyone dares utter another slander against her, I will not forgive it." The Red Guards were utterly deflated. The leader's face twisted in frustration, but he knew he was beaten. They muttered amongst themselves and without another word turned and dispersed. Lena Thorne stood in front of me, a solid, unshakable shield. Her sharp eyes swept the remaining onlookers. "Let it be known," she said, her voice clear and cold, "that anyone who dares stain my daughter-in-law's name had better be ready to pay the price." I stood there, my fingers icy cold, but my heart was warmer than it had ever been. I had a family. I had protectors. I was not alone. Kalen turned to me, his eyes searching mine, his voice softening to a whisper meant only for me. "Don't be afraid," he said. "No one dares touch you now. You have me. You have a family too." The gala performance was still on. And I would be on that stage. But the performance I was about to give would be for more than just applause. It would be my declaration of war. The gala performance was to be the biggest event of the season. The auditorium was packed with military brass, city officials and their families. The air hummed with a pre-show buzz, a mixture of anticipation and formal politeness. Backstage was a controlled chaos of rustling costumes, last-minute vocal warm-ups, and the sharp scent of stage makeup. I stood in a corner, clad in the pale silk costume for the River of Jiangnan duet, trying to still the tremors in my hands. They weren't from stage fright. They were from the aftermath of the confrontation, from the searing memory of the Red Guard's grips on my arms, and from the white-hot fury that Seraphine had dared to go that far. The original program had listed Seraphine's solo dance as the grand finale. But just an hour before curtain, a revised sheet was circulated. Now she and I were to perform a duet. My eyes narrowed as I read the change. Of course. She wasn't finished. She couldn't stand the thought of me having a solo moment in the spotlight. This was her attempt to share the stage and in her mind overshadow me. Kalen found me, his uniform a stark, reassuring presence amidst the pastel-colored chaos. He took my hand, his brow furrowed with anger. "She's trying to pull something again, isn't she? I'll go to the stage manager. This is unacceptable." I tightened my grip on his hand, stopping him. "No," I whispered, my voice low but steady. "This time let me." He searched my face, seeing not fear but a cold, determined resolve. He nodded slowly. "All right. But I'll be in the front row. If anything happens." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The stage lights blazed, a blinding white heat. The music for River of Jiangnan began. A flowing, melodious piece that was supposed to represent a harmonious dialogue between two spirits of the river. Seraphine stood at the front of the stage, clad in a vibrant emerald green, her posture radiating a dazzling, brittle pride. I remained in the back, a quiet figure in my pale, almost silvery silk. From the first note it was a battle. Her movements were exaggerated, provocative. She leaped and spun with a technical proficiency that was impressive but soulless. Every gesture was designed to draw the eye to scream, "Look at me." During a turn sequence, she deliberately drifted into my space, her elbow jutting out to bump against my shoulder, a move disguised as part of the choreography. But I was ready. I was not the broken girl from the kiln. I was not the naive village girl she remembered. I was a woman who had died and been reborn, with the fire of a second chance burning in my soul. I didn't react to her petty aggression. Instead, I absorbed it. I let the music fill me not as a series of notes, but as the current of my own life. I flowed into the dance, my steps fluid and grounded, my posture as steady as an ancient pine. My dance wasn't about showing off. It was about telling a story. With every extension of my arm, every tilt of my head, I exuded a quiet grace that felt more profound, more authentic than her frantic display. I was the deep, calm current of the river. She was the noisy, splashing foam on the surface. I could feel the audience's focus shifting. The murmurs that had accompanied her flashy jumps quieted. The air grew still. I was dimming her brilliance, piece by piece, not by competing with her but by being her opposite. I was the soul to her shell. As the dance drew to a close, there was a final crescendoing sequence of spins. Seraphine finished hers with a dramatic flourish, chest heaving, a triumphant glint in her eye as she faced the audience. But the music wasn't over. It held one last, lingering note. I used it. I spun once, a clean, powerful turn. My pale silk skirt flared out around me, a perfect circle swirling like a fall of fresh, silent snow. And then I landed not in a showy pose, but squarely in the center of the stage, directly between Seraphine and the audience, my body angled to capture every single gaze. My final pose was one of serene completion, my head bowed not in submission, but in quiet reverence for the art itself. For a heartbeat, the hall was utterly silent. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't just polite. It was a thunderous, roaring wave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. I saw the deputy head of the troupe leap to his feet, his face alight with excitement. "This," he shouted over the din, "this is the true bearing of a lead performer." I lifted my head, my eyes meeting Kaelin's in the front row. His composure was gone. His eyes were wide, blazing with an awe and a possessiveness that made my breath catch. He was clapping, but he was looking only at me as if we were the only two people in the room. Seraphine stood frozen beside me, her face a ghastly white mask of humiliation and rage. The applause was for me. The praise was for me. She had meant to use this duet to crush me, and instead I had used her as a stepping stone. The hatred in her eyes was so pure, so venomous, I thought she might attack me right there on stage. Backstage, the moment I stepped into the wings, Kaelin was there. He didn't care about the other performers milling about. He draped a heavy cloak over my shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment. "Ilara," he said, his voice husky, stripped of its usual military crispness. "Tonight, you truly made my heart want to leap out of my chest." A genuine, giddy laugh escaped me. The adrenaline of the performance, the thrill of victory made me bold. I tilted my head, teasing. "Look at you, Officer Thorne. No composure at all." He chuckled, a low, warm sound, and leaned closer, his voice for my ears only. "You danced so beautifully I almost couldn't hold back. I wanted to rush up, pull you down, and keep anyone else from seeing you." I laughed again, a free, happy sound, and tried to push him away playfully. But he caught my hand, his grip firm, his expression turning serious. "Don't avoid me," he whispered. "I know you love dancing. I'll stand with you in everything you want. For every performance you give, I'll sit in the audience, watching only you." The promise, so simple and so profound, settled deep in my soul. This was the partnership I had never had with Julian. This was what it meant to be cherished, not possessed. The victory on stage was just the beginning. I knew Seraphine would not take her humiliation lying down. She would get more desperate, more reckless. And I was ready. I began to quietly gather my own evidence. I remembered every whispered threat, every sly comment she had made to other girls about me. I noted the times she had been seen with Julian, whose career was already on shaky ground due to his association with her. I documented the discrepancies in how she had acquired her spot in the troupe. I didn't have to do much. Her own bitterness did the work for me. She filed another anonymous complaint, this time accusing me of stealing choreography. It was a foolish, easily disproven claim. The final blow came when, by chance, Lena Thorne was visiting the troop leadership on the day the latest pile of accusations, Seraphine's and the counter-evidence I had subtly encouraged others to provide, landed on the commander's desk. Lena was sipping tea, a picture of elegant composure, when the commander, exasperated, called Seraphine in. He slammed the files onto the table. "What are you?" Lena asked, her voice deceptively calm, though her eyes were like chips of flint. "To dare slander the daughter-in-law of my family?" Seraphine's face drained of all color. She looked from the commander's stern face to Lena's icy glare. "The cultural troop has no place for someone who specializes in harming others," Lena stated, her voice final. The verdict was swift. Seraphine was expelled on the spot. Her work badge was stripped from her uniform in a humiliating public ceremony. The other girls who had once flocked to her now looked at her with nothing but disgust and relief. She had been a toxic presence and everyone knew it. I was standing nearby, waiting to receive a commendation medal for my performance, when she finally snapped. Seeing me there, triumphant and accepted, broke the last of her sanity. She let out a strangled scream and rushed at me, her hands clawed. "You're nothing but a woman who climbed up by relying on men." I didn't flinch. I simply looked at her, my expression cool and untroubled. "Too bad," I said, my voice clear and carrying. "Even if you relied on others, you could never stand on stage." The truth of it was the final, killing blow. Her face crumpled. The guards escorted her, sobbing and raving, from the building. In the end, Seraphia destroyed herself. The official notice listed her crimes: tampering with official notices, filing malicious and false accusations, scheming to sabotage a fellow performer on stage. The evidence was undeniable. And worse for her, it was revealed that all her backing, all the strings that had been pulled for her, had come from the Railway Bureau's internal resources, favors borrowed by Julian Blackwood on her behalf. The troop was shaken. The leaders were furious. The scandal was no longer just about a jealous girl. It was about the misuse of official power. That very day, Julian was summoned to the disciplinary committee for questioning. His career, already fragile, was now hanging by a thread. The man who had valued his title and reputation above all else was about to lose everything he held dear. And I felt nothing but a cold, quiet satisfaction. The wheel of fate was turning, and this time it was crushing the right people. The fallout from the scandal was swift and merciless. Julian Blackwood emerged from his disciplinary hearing with a face the color of ash. The rumors flew. He had been formally censured, his position at the Railway Bureau suspended pending a full review. The promising young cadre was now a pariah, his bright future extinguished. I learned from a gossiping troop member that he had driven a hysterical Seraphine straight back to the countryside, the very place she had worked so hard to escape. The image was vividly clear in my mind. Seraphine clinging to his arm in the jeep, sobbing, her makeup a ruined mask. "You told me you loved me," she would have shrieked. "You told me you hated Alara Vance. You told me I was the moonlight in your heart." And Julian, his own world collapsing around him, would have given her a cold, drained glance. That was when I was blind. It was a fitting end for their tawdry romance, built on my suffering. Back in her rural hometown, Seraphine had no place left to stand. Branded with a disciplinary expulsion, she was poison. Her family, desperate to be rid of the shame, hurriedly arranged a marriage for her. The groom was a man in his 40s, crippled in one leg, whose first wife had died young. His home was destitute, his temper known to be coarse and violent. It was a life of profound misery, a swamp of poverty and despair. Villagers whispered that she would often grind her teeth while stoking the stove for her unloving husband, muttering to the empty air, "Why did she get to marry a soldier? What does she have that I don't?" At midnight, clutching a thin, stained pillow, she would mumble, "Julian Blackwood once said he'd marry me, that he'd take me to the city." 3 years after her wedding, she still had no children, a fact her husband and his family reportedly blamed solely on her. The shame and isolation festered. Unable to endure the poverty, she eventually stole away and secretly returned to the city, intending to force her way back into the cultural troupe under the guise of a former member paying a visit. Desperation had stripped her of all reason. I had just finished an afternoon practice session and stepped out to buy a bottle of water when I saw her. She was a pitiful sight, her clothes tattered and dirty, her face smudged, yet she still clung to the remnants of her vanity, clutching a clumsily painted protest banner. She was babbling about injustice and corruption. She saw me and her eyes lit up with a manic fire. She started towards me, but I stopped cold, my voice cutting through her incoherent rambling. "If you don't leave right now," I said, my tone flat and devoid of emotion, "the Red Guards will be happy to invite you in for tea." The mention of the Red Guards drained the last of the color from her face. The banner slipped from her numb fingers before she could even raise it, caught by the wind and tumbling down the dirty street like a discarded piece of trash. At that moment, a group of my fellow troop girls emerged, clustering around me, chattering about the day's rehearsal. They linked their arms with mine, escorting me back towards the troop's gates. No one even spared Seraphine a glance. She was beneath their notice, a ghost from a bad dream. Driven to utter madness by the finality of that dismissal, she shrieked after my retreating back. You stole Julian from me." I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn around. I simply left her with a flat, dismissive reply that floated back on the city air. "Didn't you say yourself he'd be yours sooner or later? I'll return him to you. You two are a perfect match." After that, she lost her mind completely. The letters from the villagers, who seemed to take a grim pleasure in updating me, described her descent. Some said she spent her days by her broken stove, whispering to the empty air. Others said that whenever she heard the sound of a military bugle from a distant compound, she would lose control, her hair flying wild as she rushed to the village gate, screaming uncontrollably, "Don't steal him. He's mine. He promised me." In the end, she became a recluse, too broken and ashamed to even leave her hovel of a home. One evening, as Kalen and I sat in the quiet of the family study, he asked me gently, "You won't pity her, will you?" I looked up from the book I was reading, a faint, sorrowful smile on my lips. I reached out and ran my fingers over a button on his crisp uniform. "The only one I could ever pity," I said softly, "died because of her in my past life." The official word came a week later. Julian had been dealt with heavily. The disciplinary committee had unearthed not only the favor trading for Seraphine but also other old scandals from his past, likely a host of minor corruptions and arrogance that were now being used to build an unassailable case against him. Kalen brought me the news, finding me as I stretched after a long rehearsal. He handed me a bottle of warm water, his expression carefully neutral. "I heard," I said, taking the bottle. "Julian already knows, doesn't he?" Kalen nodded. "He's been punished. Temporarily transferred to a remote post." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Do you feel sorry for him?" I tilted my head back, took a long, slow sip of the water, and then smiled a faint, cold smile. "No." That evening, on my way back to the dormitory from a late session, a figure detached itself from the deep shadows near the gate. The twilight had deepened into a velvety blue, and the street lamps cast long, distorted shadows. It was Julian. He stood there, looking older, wearier, the confident young intellectual completely erased. His eyes, when they found mine, were overflowing with a raw, unvarnished regret. "Elara," he said, his voice cracked and hoarse. "I was wrong. I finally understand my heart. The one I've loved from beginning to end has always been you." I stared at him, my expression unmoved. So this was his epiphany? Now that he had lost his position, his mistress, and his reputation, he suddenly realized his love for the woman he had betrayed and destroyed? "So," I said, my voice calm and cutting, "your version of love was tangling with a female subordinate while you were a leader. Feeding another woman's jealousy just to retaliate against me. Using every dirty trick to drag me into the mud, then pretending to save me afterward." I took a step closer, my gaze unwavering. "Julian Blackwood, you call that love? That kind of love only disgusts me." I looked at him, this hollowed-out shell of the man I had once thought I loved. "Didn't I already tell you? I hoped you'd never appear before me again." His voice broke completely. "Elara, I truly was wrong. Whatever the Thorn family gives you, I can give you too. You want to join the cultural troupe, to have wealth and glory, to stand at the center of the stage. I can help you win it all." His words were so pathetic, so utterly missing the point, that I couldn't even form a reply. He still saw me as an ambitious climber, just like Seraphine. He understood nothing. And then I heard them, steady, familiar footsteps on the pavement behind me. Kalen walked to my side, a solid, immovable presence. He naturally took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. He looked straight at Julian, his voice cold and sharp as a blade. What she wants, Kalen stated, his words leaving no room for doubt. I can not only give but I'd lay down my life to protect. He didn't need to say more. The contrast between them was absolute. One man offered empty promises from a position of ruin. The other offered his very life from a foundation of unshakable honor. Julian looked from Kalen's resolute face to our joined hands, and the last flicker of hope in his eyes died. He had lost. Not just his career but the war for my heart, a war he never even knew he was fighting until it was far, far too late. He turned without another word and melted back into the shadows from whence he came, a ghost finally laid to rest. The air in the old Thorne family villa was thick with the scent of blooming peonies and the warm, savory aroma of the wedding banquet. Red lanterns hung from every eave, their crimson glow bleeding into the twilight, and the entire courtyard was carpeted in red silk, a traditional tapestry of joy and new beginnings. Guests flowed in and out, military officers with their chests full of medals, government officials in somber suits, and comrades in arms of Kalen's father, their laughter booming through the grand halls. The wedding banquet filled both floors of the house, a sprawling, joyous affair meticulously arranged by Lena's hand. Commander Thorne had personally called in favors, and the who's who of the city's military and political circles were in attendance. I stood at the top of the staircase, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. The gown I wore was pale red, altered from a beautiful chipao Lena had gifted me, its silk whispering against my skin. As I prepared to descend, I caught a whisper from below. Isn't that the rising star of the cultural troupe? Elara Vance, stunning. A wave of warmth, so different from the cold dread of my past life, washed over me. Lena, bustling among the guests, saw me and rushed over, clutching my hand tightly. Her smile was so wide it threatened to split her face. From today, she said, her voice thick with emotion, you are truly the daughter of our Thorne family. Her eyes, usually so sharp, were soft with affection. Anyone who dares bully you will have to face me first. I smiled back at her, my nose stinging with unshed tears. The memory was a ghost at the feast. In my past life I had been forced into the Blackwood family, plunging straight into a gilded hell. In this life I had chosen Kalen Thorne myself. This walk down the stairs wasn't just a procession. It was a march into the dawn, a deliberate step away from the long, dark night of my first life. Suddenly, a stir rippled through the corner of the hall. The cheerful chatter died down, replaced by a wave of murmurs. I turned my head, and there he was. Julian Blackwood stood at the doorway, dusty and weary as if he had traveled for days without rest. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had crawled out of a grave. Guests whispered behind their hands, "Isn't that the Railway Bureau cadre who was suspended? What's he doing here?" His eyes, frantic and pain-filled, scanned the room and found mine. The panic in them was a living thing. He started towards me, ignoring the stares. "Elara," he said, his voice low and strained, cutting through the music. "Do you really want to marry him?" He stopped a few feet away, his gaze pleading. "Don't you know I came back to the city for you? I've done so much for you. I know I was wrong, but it's not too late." "It's all far too late," I cut him off, my voice cold and clear. Suddenly he lunged forward and seized my wrist. His grip was feverishly tight. "He's not worthy of you. He only leans on his family. What can he give you that I can't?" From the midst of the guests, Kalen emerged. He moved with a calm, unstoppable force. In his pressed uniform he was the picture of solid, unassailable honor. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a storm. With a firm, deliberate gesture he pried Julian's fingers from my wrist and pulled me safely behind him, his body a shield between me and my past. "Whether I'm worthy or not is for my wife to decide," Kalen said, his voice deep and leaving no room for argument. "You have no right to say." He looked Julian up and down, his gaze dismissive. "If you're here to drink to our happiness, you're welcome. But if you're here to cause trouble," his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "I'll have to ask you to leave. On a day like this, don't force me to strike you." Julian's grip tightened into fists, his knuckles white. His face was pale as death as he stared at me over Kalen's shoulder. "Elara," he whispered, the sound a broken thing. "You truly won't look back?" I met his devastated gaze, my words slow, deliberate and final. "Julian Blackwood, I've already lived that path once. It left nothing but scars that will never fade. In the next moment, Kalen took my hand and gently placed it on his arm. Side by side, we turned our backs on Julian and walked into the warm, embracing crowd of well-wishers. The music swelled again, the chatter resumed, and the celebration closed over the spot where he stood, cutting him off from the warmth and noise as if he and the misery he represented had never existed. The wedding hall glowed. Guests raised their glasses in blessing, their applause thundering in my ears, a sound of acceptance and joy. In this life I would never shed another tear for the wrong man again. I looked up at Kalen, at the profile of the man who had chosen to stand by me, to fight for me, to build a future with me. My husband. The light in his eyes as he looked down at me was my new beginning, my final absolute truth. The final official order on Julian Blackwood came down a month after the wedding. The disciplinary committee, spurred by the scandal and the thoroughness of the evidence against him, including the formal accusations regarding his misuse of power for Seraphine and a host of other unearthed transgressions, handed down a severe judgment. He was branded with a grave political stain, a mark that would follow him for the rest of his life. His cadre position was stripped. He was demoted to the rank of a common laborer and sent to guard a remote railway scrapyard. The place was legendary for its misery. A bitter, wind-swept outpost where the winters were brutal and the isolation was a prison sentence. Rumor had it there were more rats than people. A month's ration ticket was barely enough for half a pound of cooking oil, and the housing was a ragged, drafty hut that offered little protection from the elements. His meals would consist of moldy flour cakes and pickled vegetables, a stark contrast to the privileged life he had once known. The man who had once treasured his title and reputation above all else, who had looked down on me from the heights of his perceived superiority, would now live in the very dirt he had once scorned. He would never rise again. His bright future was not just dimmed, it was extinguished, ground into the dust. I heard the news while rehearsing a new piece at the troupe. Kalen found me in the practice room, his footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. He didn't speak at first, just watched me as I finished a sequence. "It's done," he said simply. "He's been transferred to the scrapyard in the Northern Territories." I lowered my arms, catching my breath. I heard. He studied my face, his own expression unreadable. "I once asked you if you pitied him. I'll ask again. Is this punishment too heavy?" I walked over to him, the sunlight from the high windows casting long bars across the floor. I reached out and pinched the sleeve of his uniform, a playful gesture that held a world of understanding. "Officer Thorne," I teased gently, "are you using official power for personal revenge?" He didn't smile. He looked down at me, his eyes serious. Then he pulled me into his arms, his hold firm and secure. He lowered his head and kissed my temple, a soft, lingering press of his lips that spoke of possession and devotion. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "Public matters are public. Private matters are private." His actions deserved punishment. I only made sure he tasted the full measure of retribution a little sooner. I closed my eyes, leaning into his strength. From now on, I would be a shining light on the stage, my name spoken with respect, my life intertwined with a good and honorable man. And Julian Blackwood? He was nothing more than a faded speck of dust, a forgotten footnote in the story of my glorious, reclaimed life. The scales of justice, so horribly unbalanced in my first life, had finally been set right. The past was truly finally dead. And my future, bright and boundless, was just beginning. The end.